You know what's absolutely hilarious about humans? Ambassador Krathos clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among the Zentari. They're basically squishy bags of mostly water, yet they strut around the galaxy like they're made of neutronium. High Commander Vextara fluttered her crystalline wings in annoyance. If you're about to launch into another one of your humans are so amusing speeches, I should remind you that they've conquered 3 hostile systems in the past solar cycle alone. Exactly my point. Krathos waved his secondary appendages enthusiastically. They shouldn't be able to do that. Their bones break if you look at them wrong. Their skin tears easier than processed nutrient wrapping, and their temperature regulation is so primitive, they have to wear artificial coverings just to survive mild climate variations. The 2 alien diplomats stood in the observation deck of the Galactic Council Station, watching as a human delegation prepared to board their shuttle below. The humans moved with that peculiar bipedal gait that always made Krathos feel slightly nauseated. And yet, Vextara pointed out, her crystalline form catching the light of the nearby star, they've managed to become one of the most feared species in known space. Perhaps you should spend less time amusing yourself with their physical limitations, and more time wondering how they've achieved that. Krathos's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Zentari equivalent of rolling one's eyes. Oh, please. They just got lucky with their technological development. Give them a few centuries and they'll settle down like every other species. The words had barely left his primary speech organ when alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the observation deck in an ominous glow. Attention, all diplomatic personnel. Hegemony Warfleet detected entering system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Krathos's exoskeleton paled several shades. The Hegemony, a collection of aggressive species that had been pushing into Council space for the past decade. They were notorious for their brutality and complete disregard for diplomatic solutions. Well, Vextara's crystalline voice took on a sharp edge. I suppose you're about to get a front-row seat to observe these amusing humans in action. Below them, the human delegation had stopped boarding their shuttle. Instead, they were running, with that surprisingly quick bipedal movement, toward the station's defense command center. Their ambassador, a female human named Sarah Chen, was already barking orders into her communication device. This is Human Ambassador Chen. Initiate Protocol Thunderstorm. I repeat, initiate Protocol Thunderstorm. Authorization code, Sierra Hotel, India Echo Lima Delta. Krathos watched in fascination as the human's previously casual demeanor transformed. Gone were the friendly smiles and polite nods. Their faces had become masks of focused determination, and their movements took on an almost predatory quality. What's Protocol Thunderstorm? He asked, trying to keep his mandibles from chattering nervously as the station's warning sirens continued to wail. Vextara's crystalline form vibrated in what might have been appreciation. Watch and learn, my friend. Watch and learn. The next few hours were a revelation for Krathos. The humans, those supposedly fragile beings he'd spent so much time mocking, moved with practiced efficiency. Their ships, which had been lurking at the system's edge under stealth fields, paranoid, Krathos had called them earlier, swooped in with devastating precision. The human vessels were smaller than the Hegemony warships, but they moved like angry insects, darting in and out of the enemy's firing solutions. Their tactics made no sense to Krathos's militarily trained mind, until they did. They're not trying to match the Hegemony's firepower, Vextara observed. They're forcing them to split their attention, creating gaps in their formation. Indeed, the human ships seemed to be engaging in an elaborate dance, drawing Hegemony vessels away from their carefully maintained battle formations. Each time a gap appeared, it was exploited ruthlessly. Ambassador Chen's voice came over the station's comm system again. All non-combat personnel, please remain in your designated safety zones. Hammer of Dawn, you are cleared hot. Repeat, Hammer of Dawn, you are cleared hot. A new ship appeared from behind the station, a massive human vessel that had been hiding in plain sight, its hull covered in sensor-baffling materials. Its name was written in human script along its side. HMS Hammer of Dawn. That's impossible, Krathos chittered. We would have detected a ship that size during standard security sweeps. Would you? Vextara's tone was amused. Like you detected their other ships? The Hammer of Dawn moved with surprising grace for its size, sliding into position in the gap the smaller human vessels had created in the Hegemony formation. Its weapon ports opened, revealing something that made Krathos's internal organs clench in fear. Are those gravitational disruption cannons? He whispered. But those are theoretical. The power requirements alone would... The space between the human ship and the hegemony fleet distorted, as if reality itself was being stretched and twisted. 3 hegemony vessels literally crumpled in on themselves, their hulls buckling under forces that shouldn't exist outside of a black hole's event horizon. Theoretical, Vextara repeated dryly. Yes, I suppose they were, to us. The remaining hegemony ships attempted to regroup, but the damage was done. Their formation was in shambles, and the smaller human vessels pounced like predators that had been waiting for precisely this moment. Precision strikes targeted weapon systems and engines, disabled rather than destroyed. Within 20 minutes of the Hammer of Dawn's appearance, the battle, if it could even be called that, was over. The hegemony fleet was either destroyed or disabled, their survivors being collected by human rescue ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. Ambassador Chen's voice returned to the comm system, as calm as if she were discussing the station's dinner menu. Threat neutralized. All personnel may return to normal activities. We apologize for any inconvenience this incident may have caused. The scheduled diplomatic reception will begin in 2 hours as planned. His mandibles worked soundlessly for several moments before he managed to speak. They're still having the reception after this? Of course they are. Vextara's crystalline form sparkled with what might have been amusement. They're human. They'll probably serve those little sandwich things they're so fond of, and act like turning a hostile fleet into scrap metal is just another day at the office. But... Carax's external sensors were still trying to process what he'd witnessed. The gravitational weapons, the stealth technology, the coordination. They're supposed to be primitive. No, Vextara corrected him. They're supposed to be human. There's a difference. One you might want to study more carefully. 2 hours later, Carax found himself at the diplomatic reception, watching in amazement as the humans mingled with other species as if nothing unusual had happened. Ambassador Chen was chatting with a group of Proxian delegates about their recent cultural exchange program, while nearby, a human military officer was enthusiastically explaining the rules of something called poker to a bewildered Medusan. I don't understand, Carax admitted to Vextara, who had remained by his side throughout the evening. How can they switch from devastating warfare to casual diplomacy so quickly? Because they've had more practice at both than any species in known space, she replied. Did you know that humans spent most of their pre-spaceflight history fighting each other? Carax's sensory appendages twitched in surprise. But that's barbaric! How did they survive? They survived precisely because it was barbaric, Vextara explained. They learned to wage war with devastating efficiency, yes. But they also learned the importance of peace. They learned when to fight, when to talk, and most importantly, when to do both at the same time. She gestured toward Ambassador Chen, who was now laughing at something the Proxian delegate had said. Look at her. Really look. She authorized a military action that destroyed several ships and ended numerous lives, and now she's discussing art exhibitions. Not because she's callous, but because she, like all humans, understands something that many species never grasp. And what's that? Carax asked, genuinely curious now. That war and peace aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. Humans don't excel at war because they love it. They excel at it because they fear what it makes them become. And that fear paradoxically makes them better at it than species who glorify combat. Carax watched as a human server offered him a tray of those tiny sandwiches. He took one carefully in his manipulator appendage, noting how the server didn't even flinch at his alien appearance. They are afraid of war, he said slowly. Not because they fear fighting it, but because they fear how good at it they can be. Vextara finished. Yet they don't let that fear paralyze them. They channel it into preparation, into diplomacy, into creating weapons they hope never to use and peace treaties they pray will last. Glass of human wine. Ambassador Carax? Ambassador Vextara. I trust you're enjoying the reception? Carax looked at the human female with new eyes. Indeed, Ambassador Chen. I was just commenting to Vextara about how impressive humans are at compartmentalization. Chen's lips curved in what Carax now recognized as a knowing smile. Oh, we're not compartmentalizing, Ambassador. We're celebrating. Celebrating? Carax's mandibles clicked in confusion. But the battle. We're celebrating because there was a battle instead of a war, Chen explained. We're celebrating because we showed the hegemony that violence isn't profitable here, without having to destroy them completely. We're celebrating because tomorrow, we'll sit down with their representatives and begin the long process of turning enemies into allies. She raised her glass. We're celebrating life, Ambassador Krathos, in all its complicated glory. As Krathos watched the human ambassador move on to her next diplomatic engagement, he finally understood. Humans weren't just warriors or diplomats or scientists or artists. They were all of these things, simultaneously and continuously. Their strength wasn't in their technology or their tactics or even their adaptability. Their strength was in their understanding that every end was just another beginning, that every battle could lead to peace, and that the most terrifying thing about being good at war was the responsibility it placed on you to be even better at peace. "I believe," he said to Vextara, "I owe the humans an apology." "Save it for the trade negotiations next week," she replied, her crystalline form glowing with amusement. "I hear they're planning to discuss opening humanitarian aid channels to hegemony worlds." "Humanitarian aid? To the species that just attacked us?" "Of course," Vextara said. "They're human. They've learned through millennia of warfare that the best way to survive isn't to destroy your enemies." She paused, watching as Ambassador Chen raised a toast with a group of diplomatic personnel, including, Krathos noticed with shock, 2 hegemony representatives who had survived the battle. "The best way to survive is to turn your enemies into friends. And humans, my dear Krathos, are very, very good at surviving." Krathos clicked his mandibles thoughtfully as he watched the gathering. Humans were indeed fascinating creatures, not despite their contradictions, but because of them. They were warriors who craved peace, diplomats who prepared for war, and survivors who never forgot that today's enemy could be tomorrow's ally. Perhaps, he reflected, that was why they had achieved so much in such a short time. Not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because they understood something fundamental about existence that many other species were still struggling to grasp. The universe wasn't divided into war and peace, friend and foe, victory and defeat. It was an endless series of opportunities to learn, to grow, and to become better than you were yesterday. And humans, with their strange mixture of fragility and strength, fear and courage, war and peace, were perfectly adapted to thrive in such a universe. Krathos made a mental note to update his diplomatic reports. Under threat assessment for humanity, he would no longer write minimal, physically fragile species with moderate technological capabilities. Instead, he would write something far more accurate. Approach with respect. They fear war not because they are afraid of it, but because of the monster it makes them. And they are very, very good at controlling their monsters. 3 solar cycles later, Krathos found himself in a position he'd never anticipated, aboard a human diplomatic vessel bound for hegemony space. The ship, named with typical human whimsy as HMS Olive Branch, was ostensibly a diplomatic courier. However, Krathos had learned enough about humans by now to know that nothing they built was ever just one thing. "Fascinating design, isn't it?" Ambassador Chen said, appearing beside him as he studied the ship's internal schematics in the observation lounge. "Would you like to know why we named her Olive Branch?" Krathos's mandibles clicked in what had become his equivalent of a human smile. "Let me guess. It's both a symbol of peace and something else entirely. The olive branch is an ancient human symbol of peace. It's also the densest hardwood that grew on Earth. Our ancestors used it to make clubs and spear shafts before they learned it could be a symbol of reconciliation." "How perfectly human," Krathos observed. "Even your peace symbols are weapons in disguise." Chen laughed, a sound Krathos had come to appreciate for its complexity. Humans could laugh in so many different ways, each carrying its own subtle meaning. This laugh was warm but carried an edge of something deeper. "Actually," she said, "it's the other way around. We turned a weapon into a symbol of peace. There's a difference." Before Krathos could respond, the ship's AI, another fascinating human innovation, spoke through the ambient sound system. "Approaching hegemony checkpoint. All diplomatic personnel, please prepare for customs inspection." Krathos watched in fascination as the human crew smoothly transitioned into what he now recognized as their diplomatic stance. Weapons were discreetly hidden beneath formal attire, smiles were carefully calibrated to show precisely the right number of teeth, and postures shifted to appear simultaneously unthreatening and unmovable. "Tell me, Ambassador Chen," Krathos said as they watched the hegemony customs vessels approach. "How does it feel to be returning to the space where just 3 cycles ago you commanded a battle?" Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "It feels like progress, Ambassador Krathos. 3 cycles ago, we had to demonstrate our capacity for violence. Today, we demonstrate our capacity for forgiveness. Both are equally important." The customs inspection went smoothly. Almost too smoothly, Krathos thought. The hegemony inspectors were professional but wary, their compound eyes constantly darting between the human crew members as if expecting them to suddenly reveal hidden tentacles or cosmic horror appendages. Krathos was watching how the humans handled the inspection. They were unfailingly polite, yet every movement, every gesture, every carefully chosen word seemed calculated to remind the hegemony inspectors of what had happened 3 cycles ago, without ever directly referencing it. "You've turned diplomacy into an art form," he commented to Chen after the inspectors had left. "Every interaction is layered with meaning." "All species practice diplomacy, Ambassador," Chen replied. "We just had more practice at practicing it while holding a blade behind our back. It's not something we're proud of, but it's something we've learned to use constructively." The journey continued deeper into hegemony space. Krathos noticed how the human crew maintained their professional demeanor even as they passed the debris field from the battle, now mostly cleared but still visible to sensitive scanners. They were heading to the hegemony capital world for what humans called peace talks, though Krathos had learned that human peace was as complex and multifaceted as human war. "I've been studying your history," he told Chen as they shared a meal in the ship's diplomatic dining room. The humans had gone to considerable effort to accommodate his unique dietary needs, another small but significant gesture that spoke volumes about their approach to interspecies relations. "Oh?" Chen raised an eyebrow, a human gesture Krathos had learned indicated either interest or skepticism, depending on context. "Any particular period?" "Your 20th century, Krathos replied. "Specifically something called the Marshall Plan. Am I correct in assuming our current mission bears some philosophical similarities?" Chen's smile was genuine this time. "Very good, Ambassador. You're beginning to think like a human diplomatic historian. Yes, there are parallels. After our most devastating global war, we learned that true victory doesn't lie in defeating your enemy, but in helping them become something new, something better." "And that's what we're offering the hegemony? A chance to become something better?" "We're offering them a choice," Chen corrected. "The same choice we've faced countless times in our own history. Adapt and grow, or cling to old ways and stagnate. The aid packages we're bringing aren't just about resources. They're about ideas, opportunities, connections." The ship's AI interrupted again. "Approaching hegemony capital world. All personnel prepare for orbital insertion. Ambassador Chen, priority message from hegemony high command." Chen excused herself, leaving Krathos to contemplate what he'd learned. The humans were indeed monsters, but not the kind he'd initially feared. They were monsters of adaptation, of transformation. They didn't just change themselves, they changed everything they touched, everyone they met. And somehow, remarkably, they managed to make most of those changes for the better. When Chen returned, her expression was serious but not worried. "The hegemony leadership is divided on our arrival. Some factions are calling for our arrest and execution. Others want to sign the peace accords immediately." "And how do you feel about that?" Krathos asked, genuinely curious about the human response to death threats. Chen's smile returned, but now it held that edge that Krathos had learned to recognize. The one that reminded him that beneath every human diplomat lurked a potential warrior. "I feel like it's going to be an interesting negotiation. Would you care to observe? You might learn something about how humans handle being both the monster and the peacemaker." Krathos clicked his mandibles in agreement. "I wouldn't miss it for all the stars in the galaxy, Ambassador. Though I do have one question before we begin." "Yes?" "The Hammer of Dawn. It's out there somewhere, isn't it? Hidden just like before?" Chen's expression didn't change, but her eyes held that mysterious human gleam that could mean either amusement or warning. "Ambassador Krathos, one of the first rules of human diplomacy is never confirm or deny the location of your biggest stick when you're extending an olive branch." As they prepared to dock with the hegemony's orbital diplomatic station, Krathos reflected on how far his understanding of humans had come. They weren't just warriors who learned to make peace, or diplomats who learned to make war. They were something far more interesting. They were builders who had learned to create beauty from the ruins of conflict, teachers who taught by both example and counterexample, and yes, monsters who had learned to use their nature for the benefit of all. The future of human hegemony relations was uncertain, but Krathos was sure of one thing: it would be fascinating to watch. Because humans didn't just wage war or make peace. They transformed both into something entirely new, something that could reshape the galaxy itself. And perhaps that was their greatest strength. Not the monster they could become, but their ability to take that monster and make it dance to the music of peace. The Hegemony diplomatic station was a study in brutalist architecture, all sharp angles and imposing surfaces, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Krathos noticed how the human delegation seemed almost amused by the attempted show of strength, their expressions carrying that peculiar mix of appreciation and assessment he'd come to recognize. "Reminds me of Soviet architecture," one of the human diplomatic staff muttered to another. "All statement, no substance." Ambassador Chen led their procession through the station's corridors, her stride perfectly calibrated, neither aggressive nor submissive. Krathos had learned to read human body language well enough to recognize that every member of the delegation was positioning themselves according to some predetermined pattern, one that probably had both diplomatic and tactical significance. They were met by the Hegemony High Council in a chamber that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The council members sat on elevated platforms, their various alien physiologies arranged to maximize their imposing presence. Krathos noticed how the humans took in these details with quick, efficient glances, their expressions remaining pleasantly neutral. "Representatives of humanity," the first speaker of the Hegemony rumbled, their translator rendering their complex harmonics into standard galactic common. "You come before us having destroyed our ships, humiliated our fleet, and now you speak of peace? What peace can there be with a species that hides planet-killing weapons behind diplomatic credentials?" Chen's smile didn't waver. "Honorable Speaker, we come before you having demonstrated our capability for violence precisely so we need not use it again. The ships we destroyed can be rebuilt. The lives lost, tragically, cannot be restored. But the future, that we can build together." She gestured, and her staff began distributing data crystals to the council members. "What we offer is not submission or dominance, but transformation. These crystals contain detailed proposals for joint scientific ventures, cultural exchange programs, and economic cooperation initiatives. They also contain the complete technical specifications for our gravitational disruption technology." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Krathos himself felt his mandibles go slack. Sharing such advanced military technology was unprecedented. "Before you question our sanity," Chen continued, her voice cutting through the chaos with practiced ease, "examine the specifications carefully. You'll notice that the technology requires very specific, rare elements to function, elements that can only be found in human space and what is now Hegemony territory. Neither of us can effectively use this technology without cooperation from the other." Krathos watched in fascination as understanding dawned across the various alien faces of the council. The humans weren't just offering peace. They were creating a situation where peace was the most profitable option for everyone involved. "You would share such weapons technology with us?" the second speaker asked, their compound eyes flickering with suspicion. "After we attacked you?" "We're sharing it precisely because you attacked us," Chen replied. "On Earth, our ancient ancestors had a saying, 'Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.' We're offering you the chance to be neither enemy nor friend, but partner. We've studied your society extensively. You value strength, directness, and prosperity. We respect that. So we're being strong, direct, and offering you prosperity." The third speaker, a being of living crystal not unlike Vextara, chimed in with harmonics that suggested deep thought. "And if we refuse? Then we leave, taking our proposals with us. You continue trying to expand your territory through force, we continue defending our allies, and we both waste resources that could be better spent exploring the galaxy and advancing our civilizations." Chen's voice carried that peculiar human tone that managed to be simultaneously friendly and filled with steel. "But I don't think you'll refuse." "You seem very confident, Ambassador," the first speaker rumbled. "I am. Because in the 3 cycles since our battle, you've had time to analyze our capabilities. You know that the ships we deployed, the technology we demonstrated, was only a fraction of what we could bring to bear. Yet instead of continuing to build weapons, we're here, offering to help you build a future." Chen stepped forward, her movement deliberate and measured. "That's not weakness, honorable speakers. That's the kind of strength that transforms galaxies." Krathos watched as the council members exchanged glances, their various biological and crystalline forms shifting in what he recognized as serious consideration. The humans had done it again. They'd turned a demonstration of overwhelming force into a foundation for cooperation. Hours later, as preliminary agreements were being drafted and diplomatic staff from both sides were beginning the complex dance of turning broad proposals into actionable plans, Krathos found Chen in one of the station's observation lounges. "You knew they would agree," he said. It wasn't a question. We calculated a 94% probability, Chen admitted. The hegemony's entire society is built on the acquisition and demonstration of strength. By showing them that cooperation with us could make them stronger than conquest ever could, we gave them a way to evolve without losing face. You're transforming them, Karax observed, like you transformed yourself over your history. We're giving them the opportunity to transform themselves, Chen corrected. There's a difference. Forced change never lasts. But if you show someone a better path and let them choose to take it. She gestured to where hegemony and human technical experts were already deep in discussion about joint research projects. Well, that's how you turn monsters into makers. Karax clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. You know, when we first met, I thought humans were amusing because of your physical limitations. Now I find you terrifying because of your ability to turn everything, even your own capacity for violence, into a tool for peace. Chen laughed, the sound carrying both warmth and that edge of something deeper that Karax had learned to recognize as uniquely human. Terrifying, perhaps. But remember what I told you about the olive branch. Sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones you choose not to use. As they watched the stars through the station's viewport, Karax reflected on how much his understanding of humans had evolved. They were indeed monsters, but monsters who had learned to use their nature for creation rather than destruction. They had taken their capacity for violence and transformed it into a capacity for change, their fear of war into a tool for peace, their physical limitations into technological innovations, and now they were teaching others to do the same. The galaxy, Karax realized, would never be the same. But perhaps that was exactly what it needed. Monsters who had learned to dance to the music of peace, teaching others the steps to that same transformative dance. And humans feared war not because they were afraid of it, but because they understood its true power. Not to destroy, but to create the necessity for something better. And in that understanding lay the seed of a transformation that would reshape not just humanity, but all who encountered them. The monster, it seemed, had become the teacher, and the galaxy could only be better for it. 5 years later, Karax stood in the central chamber of the newly constructed Galactic Cooperation Center, a massive space station jointly built by human, hegemony, and council engineering teams. The structure itself was a testament to the transformation that had swept through known space, its architecture blending the imposing strength preferred by the hegemony with the elegant efficiency favored by humans and the artistic flourishes beloved by council species. Quite a change from that first diplomatic reception, isn't it? Vextara's crystalline form caught the light from the station's artificial sun, creating a rainbow of reflections across the chamber's walls. Indeed, Karax agreed, watching as representatives from 24 species mingled in the vast space. Though I noticed the humans are still serving those tiny sandwiches. Some things never change, Ambassador Chen said, approaching them with her characteristic measured stride. The years had added a few strands of gray to her hair, a fascinating human biological process that Karax still didn't fully understand. But her eyes retained that complex mixture of warmth and steel. Speaking of change, Vextara chimed, her crystalline surfaces vibrating in what Karax had learned was amusement. I hear the hegemony is requesting human advisors for their educational reform program. Chen nodded, her expression thoughtful. They're particularly interested in our historical studies curriculum. They want to understand how we managed to maintain our warrior traditions while developing a society that values peace. Karax clicked his mandibles in what had become his equivalent of a chuckle. 5 years ago they wanted to execute you. Now they want to learn from you. How very human. Actually, Chen corrected, it's very hegemony. They've always valued strength and directness. Once we showed them that adaptation could be a form of strength, and that honest self-examination could be a form of directness, they embraced those concepts with remarkable enthusiasm. The chamber's ambient lighting shifted, signaling the approach of the day's main event. Representatives from various species began moving toward their designated positions, creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. Is everything prepared for the announcement? Vextara asked, her crystalline form shifting to its formal configuration. Chen's smile held that now familiar edge of something deeper. The joint exploration fleet is ready. 17 ships, crews drawn from all member species, using technology that combines the best innovations from each civilization. The hegemony provided the propulsion systems. We contributed the gravitational manipulation technology, and the council species developed the sensor arrays. Karax felt his internal organs flutter with excitement. The first true collaborative expedition to the galactic core. If you had told me 5 years ago that we'd be sending a joint fleet into unknown space, I would have thought you were malfunctioning. That's because 5 years ago you still thought of species as static entities, Chen observed. You hadn't yet learned what humans have known for millennia. That the greatest strength isn't in remaining unchanging, but in choosing how you change. The chamber fell silent as the first speaker of the hegemony, the president of the Human Diplomatic Corps, and the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council, took their positions on the central platform. Krathos noticed how they stood as equals, their various physiologies arranged to demonstrate unity rather than dominance. 5 years ago, the first speaker began, their harmonics carrying clearly through the station's acoustic systems. We faced each other as enemies. Today, we stand together as architects of a new age of exploration and discovery. The human president stepped forward next. We learned, through our own long history, that the greatest victories are not won through force of arms, but through force of will. The will to change, to grow, to become more than we were. The High Chancellor's crystalline form sparkled as they added, "And now we take the next step together, not as separate species seeking advantage over each other, but as a united civilization seeking understanding of our shared universe." As the announcement continued, detailing the ambitious plans for the joint expedition, Krathos found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The humans had indeed transformed the galaxy, but not through conquest or dominance. They had done it by showing others how to transform themselves. "You know," he said quietly to Chen, "I finally understand what you meant about fearing war because of the monster it makes you. But it's not just about war, is it? It's about power in all its forms." Chen nodded, her expression serious. Power isn't just the ability to destroy or dominate. True power is the ability to create change, and the wisdom to create the right kind of change. And that's what humans really are, Krathos realized. Not just monsters who learn to control their nature, but teachers who learn to help others control theirs. "We are all monsters of one kind or another," Chen replied, watching as the various species mingled and interacted in ways that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. "The trick is to be the right kind of monster, the kind that builds rather than breaks, that transforms rather than destroys." As the ceremony concluded and the chamber filled with the sounds of dozens of species celebrating together, Krathos understood that he had witnessed something far more significant than a simple peace treaty or technological exchange. He had watched as humanity's greatest fear, their capacity to become monsters, had become their greatest gift to the galaxy. Because they had learned not just to control their inner monsters, but to teach others how to do the same. They had shown that the most powerful transformation wasn't from warrior to peacemaker, but from being controlled by one's nature, to choosing how to express it. The joint fleet would soon depart for the Galactic Core, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of multiple civilizations. But it carried something else too, something far more precious than technology or resources. It carried the lesson that humanity had learned through millennia of warfare and peace. That the true measure of a civilization wasn't in its ability to win conflicts, but in its ability to transform them into opportunities for growth. That the real power wasn't in being the strongest monster, but in being the wisest teacher. And as Krathos watched the celebration unfold, he realized that this was just the beginning. Because humans hadn't just changed the galaxy, they had taught it how to change itself. The monster had become the mentor, and the dance of transformation was just beginning. End.